This week, we discussed the important issue of the relationship between state attorneys general and the federal government. And it's no surprise to anyone that the blue state attorneys general are suing the Trump administration, just as the red state attorneys general sued the Obama administration. And all the talks of cooperative federalism and the literature which emerged, 10 years ago, seems to be held in abeyance. And so, as with the rest of law school, we're gonna study the arguments. We'll study the fights because law school does that. Lawyers do that. We like to study arguments and fights, right? That's what generates controversy, legal fees, law review articles, reported decisions. That's how we work. But the real story of state attorneys general and their relationship with the federal government is, in my view, very, very different. The reality is that in the day-to-day operations, state attorneys general and their staff of 12 to 13,000 lawyers work extraordinarily cooperatively with federal agencies to make sure that things go the way they're supposed to. Now, it didn't used to be. It used to be before the New Deal, before the Great Depression. The federal government was very not involved with the details of how all of us as Americans lived our lives. It was far away. But the New Deal came, the federal judiciary allowed it to come, and today over 30% of state budgets, are federal dollars as the federal government passes a law, passes the regulations, and then sends money to the states that either empowers or restricts the states from doing various things in order to use those federal dollars to enhance national programs with a lot of flexibility in doing it. And that's an important issue. Now, over 60% of that money goes into health related, but it goes into other areas as well: the environment, health, job training, child care, a whole array of social services, and of course transportation. So that's the example I'm going to use today to kind of make my point. I live in Lisbon Falls, Maine, and we just got a new bridge a couple years ago that spans the Androscoggin River between Lisbon Falls and Durham. I suggest you take a moment and go on the internet and take a look at our new bridge. We're all kind of very proud of it. Bridges have spanned that gap since 1918. Most of them would be washed away, but as a result of the New Deal in 1936, a new bridge was built by the federal government, 100% federal dollars, that lasted a long time. And I must have crossed that bridge, 10,000 times. It worked, right? Didn't get washed out by the spring floods or the ice flows. So the federal government came in and made that happen. 1936 was built by the American Bridge Company in New York City. Well, but it's time to come that we need a new bridge. So the federal government, again, was going to step up and pay for it. But times have changed. And so there's a lot of hoops that had to be jumped through. And the town of Lisbon, where I live, and the state and the federal government engaged in a series of hearings and discussions to try to make that happen. We had to make sure that the construction would withstand Maine winters and an occasional flood. We had to make sure that the fish had started to come back in the Androscoggin River. We had to make sure they were protected, and we wanted a new boat ramp so that people could go out and boat and occasionally swim in the Androscoggin River. Again, as a direct result of the federal government's Clean Air and Clean Water Act, which was passed in the 1960s, along with a lot of federal money, which has cleaned up the river. But a fight broke out. Over whether we were going to get our extra sidewalk, a bike path, if you will, across the bridge. And, it was a bitter fight. There were public hearings and discussions, and actually went all the way to the governor and our congressmen, who were running against each other, and they weighed in, fighting in favor of the bike path over this bridge. Well, why do I raise it today? Because there was a lot of state lawyering that went on behind the scenes in the making of this decision and all the decisions as to how the $700 billion flow from the federal government to the state government. And that bridge was a pretty good example. If you want to see the grand opening, it's on YouTube. Everybody looked pretty happy. But there was a lot of fights going over it. And it was this government lawyering that made it happen. The design for the bridge, the contracts for the bridge had to be approved by joint federal and state regulatory structures. We had to make sure there wasn't any corruption, any kickbacks. And so for that reason, we made sure that there was there was a fair bidding process and that the workers were paid according to federal and state guidelines. When it works invisibly, but it's so vitally important to how we all live our lives. So in law school, we cover the fights, right? We're going to talk about all these lawsuits and all this litigation. But let's not forget the fact that tens of thousands, over 10,000 state employees, state attorney generals, assistant attorneys general, are working to make this money flow, to provide education for our kids, to clean up our waters, to build our bridges. And that's the issue we don't want to forget as we continue to talk about the litigation and the harshness that is often marking our times.